Hello and welcome back to a new video on my channel. In this video I would like to talk about a few mistakes that a lot of people do when buying the very first binoculars for astronomy. So choosing the perfect binoculars for astronomy can be very difficult, and there are a lot of mistakes that you can do when buying your very first binoculars for astronomy. Therefore, in this video I would like to share a few mistakes with you that a lot of people do when buying the very first binoculars for astronomy. But first of all, I would like to mention that this video is not sponsored and I'm not being paid for it, and all products shown in this video were purchased by myself. So I personally really like to use binoculars for astronomy. So I personally do have 3 different binoculars, and the biggest binoculars I do own are these 20 by 80 binoculars. And now I would like to start by introducing the mistakes that you can do when buying your very first binoculars for astronomy. The very first mistake that a lot of people do when buying the very first binoculars for astronomy is that they try to buy the binoculars that do have the highest magnification, and that is a big mistake. So for sure, magnification is very important when doing astronomy because some objects are quite small, but there are a few disadvantages when buying binoculars that do have a very high magnification. So first of all, when using binoculars with very high magnification, you will have a smaller field of view, and therefore it will be more challenging for you to find those objects in the night sky. Furthermore, when using binoculars with a higher magnification, it will be more difficult for you to track those objects. So Earth is rotating, and therefore the object will move through your field of view. And therefore it's very important to track the object so that the object is centered in your field of view. And furthermore, when using binoculars with very high magnification, it will be more difficult for you to achieve a clear view of these objects, because binoculars that do have a higher magnification are usually quite heavy, and therefore you will move all the time, and therefore you will not get a clear view of the night sky. For sure, you can also use binoculars with a higher magnification, but then it's very important to use a tripod, because then you will not move all the time, and then you will achieve a clear view of the night sky. But on the other side, having a higher magnification can be very helpful for observing the moon, for example, so those smaller objects. So definitely here and there having a higher magnification can be very helpful, but definitely make sure to use a tripod when planning to use binoculars with a higher magnification. The next mistake that a lot of beginners do when buying the very first binoculars for astronomy is that they focus more on magnification and not on aperture. But especially when using binoculars for astronomy, aperture is very important. So aperture means the diameter of the optical component of your binoculars. So such as an example, these binoculars do have a diameter of 80 millimeters, which means that the diameter of the optical component is 80 millimeters. And having a higher aperture is very important for astronomy. Having a bigger aperture is very important when planning to buy binoculars for astronomy, because usually the objects we observe in astronomy are very dark. So for example, there are those deep sky objects, and these objects are very dark. So for sure there are also brighter objects such as the moon or planets, but most objects are very dark. So we usually plan to observe those deep sky objects, including galaxies, nebulae, or star clusters. And these objects are very dark, and therefore it's very important to have a higher aperture. When planning to use binoculars for astronomy, it's very important to have a bigger aperture, because when having a bigger aperture, we do have more light gathering power. And having more light gathering power is very important for astronomy because those objects are very dark. So I usually recommend using binoculars that do have an aperture of at least 50 millimeters. So that's very important. Mistake number 3 is that a lot of beginners try to buy the cheapest binoculars they can find. And that is a very, very big mistake. And one example for those binoculars are these binoculars. So these are 10 by 25 binoculars, and they are relatively cheap, but they are not suitable for astronomy. So as you can see, the first number stands for the magnification. So in this case, we do have a magnification of 10 times and an aperture of 25 millimeters. In this case, these binoculars are not suitable for astronomy because the aperture is simply too small, and therefore the light gathering power is simply too small. So when looking through these binoculars, you will not see any structures in those deep sky objects. So as I have already mentioned, definitely try to buy binoculars that do have an aperture of at least 50 millimeters. So when buying these very cheap binoculars, you will definitely buy new binoculars a few weeks later because you are simply not happy with these binoculars. Therefore, definitely do not buy the cheapest binoculars you can possibly find. You do not need to buy very expensive binoculars, but definitely do not buy these very cheap binoculars because they are not suitable for astronomy. The next mistake that a lot of beginners do when buying the very first binoculars for astronomy is that they try to buy the biggest binoculars they can find. So they buy the binoculars with the highest magnification and the highest aperture they can find. But the problem is when buying very big binoculars for astronomy, so binoculars with a very high magnification and a big aperture, these binoculars will be very heavy. And that is a problem when using these binoculars for astronomy without a tripod. So just as an example, when planning to use 20 by 80 binoculars for astronomy, so these binoculars, you will definitely need a tripod. So you can't observe the night sky with these binoculars without a tripod, because you will move all the time and you will not get a clear view of the night sky. And that is a mistake that a lot of beginners do when buying their very first binoculars for astronomy. So they buy binoculars with a higher magnification than 20 times and a bigger aperture than 80 millimeters. And in that range, these binoculars will be very heavy. So definitely it's possible to buy these very big binoculars. But in this case, it's very important to use a tripod. But unfortunately, a lot of beginners buy these very heavy binoculars, but they do not use a tripod. In this case, it's not possible to observe objects in the night sky because you are moving all the time and you will not get a clear view of the night sky. So I even use these 10 by 50 binoculars for astronomy, so they do have magnification of 10 times and an aperture of 50 millimeters. So these binoculars are perfect for astronomy. In this case, these binoculars are not that heavy, so you can even use them without a tripod. So in general, you can for sure use those very big binoculars for astronomy. But in this case, it's very important to use a tripod, because that's very, very important. But on the other side, when planning to use binoculars without a tripod, I would recommend to choose smaller binoculars. So I would, for example, recommend choosing 10 by 50 binoculars. So these binoculars are very suitable for astronomy and they are not that heavy, so you can definitely use them without a tripod. So these are the mistakes I plan to share with you, and now I would like to introduce a few binoculars to you that I would recommend. So first of all, if you are planning to use binoculars for astronomy without a tripod, I would recommend these 10 by 50 binoculars. These 10 by 50 binoculars are very suitable for astronomy because you do have magnification of 10 times, and on the other side you do have an aperture of 50 millimeters, which is great for astronomy. The advantage of using these binoculars for astronomy is that you can use them without a tripod, which is great if you're planning to get started into the hobby of astronomy. If you're planning to buy bigger binoculars for astronomy, I would recommend using these 20 by 80 binoculars. These 20 by 80 binoculars are very suitable for astronomy, but in this case you need a tripod. So in this case, you do have an adapter right there, which helps you to attach these binoculars easily to a tripod. So that's definitely possible, and I'll definitely recommend it. These binoculars do have a higher magnification compared to the first one. So these binoculars do have magnification of 20 times, which is great if you're planning to observe smaller objects such as planets or the moon. These binoculars do have an aperture of 80 millimeters, which is perfect for astronomy because you can even observe those darker objects in the night sky. I have already uploaded a video about these binoculars on my channel, and I will link the video right there. As I have mentioned in the beginning of this video is not sponsored and not being paid for it, and all products shown in this video were purchased by myself. These are the mistakes I plan to share with you. If you know other mistakes, definitely make sure to write them down below in the comments, because that will definitely help other people as well. If this video was interesting and helpful to you, I would really appreciate a like and a subscription. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and until next time. Clear skies, Felix.